Hello, my friends. Today we are talking a little bit about working with herbs for the upper respiratory tract. Why, first of all, do we insist on dividing the upper and the lower respiratory tract? I mean, it's all breath, right? Comes in, goes in through your sinuses or through your mouth, down your trachea, into your lungs, does its work, and comes back out through the same path. That's the entire tract. We typically divide it right at about the neck. And part of the reason why we divide the respiratory tract into the upper, which is your throat, sinuses, upper, nasal passages, everything upper, versus the lower, which is your focuses on, sometimes it can hit your throat, can go in both ways, but it'll often focus on the lungs and bronchial tubes and the lower part of the respiratory system. So we usually divide it at the neck, in part because if you were to try to swab it, for instance, like if a doctor or nurse was going to do a culture for like the test for COVID or strep throat test, the swabbing, you can actually physically touch the area in the sinuses here. You can touch the back of the throat, even the top of the back of the throat. You can swab that. So those are the areas that are most directly exposed to the outside environment. Technically speaking, the lungs are also exposed to the outside environment. They're exposed because the air that we breathe in comes directly from the outside and goes in and touches your lungs. One of the jobs of the upper respiratory tract is to filter out some of the particulate matter that could come in through and prevent it from getting to your lungs. So we divide it into the two parts, in part because of how much exposure the respiratory tract gets to the outside environment. It's also easier often to think about how colds typically work. For some people, they tend to get head colds. Respiratory systems will be really primarily in the upper respiratory tract. Maybe they'll cough some, but not that much. Most of it is sinus pain, pressure, sinus congestion, runny nose, too dry of sinuses, and then sore throat, which can include the upper back palate, and then going down into the throat, into the upper part of the throats. Some people tend toward that, whereas other people will tend toward lower respiratory tract problems. They have a tendency to get more stuffy lungs, they have a harder time clearing phlegm and particulates and whatever else might happen in their lungs. They have a harder time with that, and they're far more prone to bronchial problems like bronchitis, pneumonia, and related lung problems. The people who tend more toward the upper will tend more toward perhaps sinus infections when illness gets stuck. So today we're going to focus on the upper part. What happens in the upper respiratory tract, and how do you choose your herbs for that? So the first thing you want to look at when you're addressing any part of the respiratory tract, but especially we're going to just really focus on the upper part. The first thing I want you to focus on is it wet or is it dry? So if you have a runny nose, that's obviously wet, right? If you have a dry nose, maybe you're getting nosebleeds because it's too dry, that's a dry situation. If you are having, so wet versus dry is important because many of the herbs we rely on are actually really quite drying. Most of the antimicrobial herbs tend to be a little bit drying, and certainly many of our fever herbs are drying. If you're working with nasal passages that are overly dry, you will want to make sure that you put something like mullein or a marshmallow leaf, maybe, possibly the root, depending on how much dryness you're dealing with, and whether that dryness is throughout the whole body or whether it's really concentrated in the symptom area. So you might want to add something that's a little bit moistening to balance if you've got too much dryness. The other piece you want to look at is hot versus cold. And in part, we are talking about hot as in, is there an accompanying fever? If you have a fever accompanying with respiratory symptoms, typically that indicates a probable virus or bacterial infection. If it is, and that kind of puts you more going in the direction of a flu virus style illness as opposed to a classic cold, which is cold symptoms, as in not hot symptoms, cold, which is, where the common cold got its name. Cold symptoms alone, without any signs of heat, often are a virus, but something that you can usually often kick on your own. And oftentimes, well, if you get into the territory of, let's say you had a cold, you had a runny, stuffy nose for a while, maybe sore throat, you were worn down, you were tired, there's no fever, there's no digestive problems with it. You took care of yourself and, everything is mostly clearing up, but you have lingering sinus pain and congestion that you just can't seem to quite kick. And the mucus that was running maybe started off as clear. Maybe it got some, whiteness to it and stayed in that range. That's still a cold sign. Once you start getting into mucus that has yellow or green to it, that's the sign of heat, which is also potentially a sign of an infection starting. So watching for cold versus hot symptoms is important. Fever is a sign of something that's a little bit bigger and requires a different set of herbs, or may ask you to add some other herbs to your formula. And then also mucus color shows whether there is a potential bacterial or other infection starting in your sinus area. So yellows and greens are colors that are in mucus, that are ones that show you need to add something to fight off the beginning of an infection, potentially. It's not a guarantee, but potentially. So hot means feverishness, physically hot, but it also means a lot of activity. So the yellow and green shows a lot of activity or heat signs that your body's working extra hard to get this thing done, and it might be losing ground or it might not, kind of depends. So you've got hot and cold, damp and dry, and you're kind of looking at how those symptoms are manifesting in your respiratory system. Once you've kind of evaluated that, oh, and the other thing you can do is you can take a look at tongue evaluation. We did the Herbs in Action Summit with Larken, or we did the Herbs in Action Summit last, a few months ago in the spring. And Larken Bunce gave a wonderful discussion about using tongue diagnosis or tongue evaluation to determine the nature of the symptoms you're seeing. So take a look at that. There is a link in the article that accompanies this video. And yeah, that's another place where you can go and get confirmation of what you believe you're seeing. So that's helpful. So now that you know what you're looking at, the question is, which herbs are you going to be working with? You're going to be putting together a formula. I usually try to keep it as simple as I can, in part because it's easy, and especially if it's me who's sick, I don't want to spend a lot of time mixing and all of that. I feel like awful. So I want to get like the 3 quickest herbs I can. And I'm looking at what 3 seem like they make a lot of sense. Typically I look for things that will help. In my case, I often tend toward damp symptoms. So I'll be looking for things that will dry my respiratory tract. I'll do like 1, maybe 2, and then antimicrobial to help fight off whatever it was. If I've got hot symptoms, I'm going to move in the direction of more antimicrobial and possibly some cooling herbs like elder and yarrow or other herbs that are similar to fever herbs, particularly if there's a fever that's accompanying this, or if when I'm feeling, if I feel my sinus area and I'm noticing just even touching my cheeks is hot, even if I don't have a fever, then I'm far more likely to aim in the direction of cooling herbs. Some herbs that are cooling, most of our herbs are not very cooling, but catnip is a really good, slightly cooling, mildly cooling, and antimicrobial. It's also one that is very helpful for accompanying digestive upset. So sometimes when you've got a lot of mucus draining, the drainage can go down your throat, end up in your stomach, and cause upset. So catnip is a perfect one for that. Other herbs that are cooling can include the mint family, particularly spearmint is slightly cooling, and it's antimicrobial, and it'll help open the sinuses. Elderflower and yarrow are both 2 that are technically warming in that they bring activity to the area, but because they open up the sinuses and open up the pores and draw the energy and the crud outward, They are also very helpful even if there is heat signs present. And they both have some antimicrobial activity. I really like the Mediterranean spices, sage, rosemary, oregano, thyme. Those ones are ones that I love for sinus stuff. Sage in particular has a strong affinity for the common cold and for getting rid of that. There have been times where I've just taken sage leaves. I've just gone outside, picked 3 leaves, stuck it in my tea, and sipped on that and just kept refilling it all day. Because sage is a really good, powerful, drying, warming herb for getting rid of flu and cold, and it's got strong antimicrobial properties. Rosemary and oregano are both also warming. All 3 of them are, most of the rennet are somewhat mildly drying. So if you have a lot of runny nose, they're really good for that. The other ones that I was going to mention were Lobelia and Spilanthes. Lobelia has a particular affinity for the lungs. So if your upper respiratory tract stuff is also invading your lungs and you're getting coughing and that sort of thing, Lobelia can be a really powerful one. Spilanthes is another good one. It's antimicrobial. That one is really pain reducing. I recommend being a little careful with it because if you use a lot of Spilanthes, it will numb the area, which is awesome. You know, I've used it for sore throats. It numbs it up. That's great. But it also can get your saliva glands flowing. So while your mouth is filling with saliva and your throat is numb, it can be challenging to manage that. I have tried this. It was challenging. So balance your use of Spilanthes, but it is really potent for reducing pain. The other one that I was thinking about was, Elecampane. Elecampane is a really excellent one, especially for sore throats. I typically think of it as more of a lower respiratory tract herb, but if I've got a sore throat, it's one of the first ones I aim for because Elecampane is really good at eliminating the harmful or the offending microbes that are in your throat. So I've found it to be amazing. So those are a selection of herbs. Choose however many you desire, but I recommend aiming for about like 3 herbs, maybe 5, depending on what's easy. And if you're blending for yourself or whomever, if you're blending for someone else, it's easier to be a slightly more complex formula, but whatever works for you. You're going to be using your herbs in a variety of ways. My personal 3 favorites for upper respiratory tract are the Herbal Infusion, which I'm not going to talk about here today. We've got Herbal Infusions, how to make and master this home remedy available, so you can take a look at that. There's also the Herbal Steam, which I'm not going to talk about because we covered the Herbal Steam in our Herbs for Fevers video. And then we also have a how to do an Herbal Steam video. So I'll put the link for both of those into the article that goes with this video. The third way that I've often used herbs for the upper respiratory tract, particularly when I have sinus pain or congestion, whether or not it's runny nose as well, but just pain and congestion in my sinuses, be an herbal compress.
Today we are preparing to do an herbal compress. An herbal compress is a way to directly apply warmed or heated herbs or herbal infusion to a body part. So what we're going to be working on today is doing one that goes on to the sinuses to help with fighting infection, and or the same formula can be used for doing like visioning and opening yourself up to more deeper dreaming or more active dreaming or lucid dreaming. So the way that I prefer to do an herbal compress is to make an herbal infusion and use the infusion as my compress. You can also choose to take your herbs and wrap them into your towel. So if you're doing that method, you would put your herbs in your towel. I'll add my rosemary to that to show you. You would put all 3 of them in here. You would fold it up and then set it into the container and fill it with water, so that way it will heat the herbs, and the qualities of the herbs will seep into it. Later, when I show you the process of doing the compress, you'll understand why I prefer to do it as an infusion. All right, so let's start off with our herbs. Today we are using rosemary, which is a nice stimulating protective herb. It allows you to relax your musculature. It's really good for when you're tense and stressed out. It also has antimicrobial qualities to it, which make it really good for fighting off fever and herbs. So we're just using a little bit of that today. If I was treating a sinus infection, cold, or other upper respiratory problems, I would probably use about 3 times what I've got in there now, at least twice. The idea is to make a very strong infusion. The next herb we're going to be working with here is elderflower. Elderflower has a lot of good properties for opening the sinuses. It's diaphoretic, so it'll help draw out stuff. It also, when you're doing it as we're doing it today for a visioning type of experience, it helps to activate the third eye and the dreaming centers so that you can lucid dream more easily. The last one I'm using today will be mugwort. And again, if I was using this for sinuses, mugwort is a really good antibacterial or antimicrobial type of herb. I might consider substituting oregano, sage, or thyme for the mugwort. But for what we're doing today, for the visioning type of experience we're looking for and the good, strong, lucid dreaming, mugwort's a really excellent partner. So you can see we've got essentially about good handful of herbs in there. Again, for medicinal strength processes, I might consider a higher amount, although this is actually a pretty large amount of elderflower and mugwort. So the next thing I'm going to do is cover this with hot water. This kettle is right now just under a boil. If I was doing this without doing filming, so I didn't have to have my kettle right here, I would have probably set it, it would probably have like just come to a boil, and then I'd pour it on. So now you've got your herbs in there. What we're going to do with these herbs is just let them steep for a little bit. I give them not a terribly, you don't want to be putting on a compress that's blisteringly hot. You don't want to burn your skin, but you do want your herbs and your infusion to be hot. So I'm going to let this stand for just a few moments, and then I'm going to strain it out, and then I'll show you, and I'll do that off camera, and I'll show you the process of actually applying a camera. So from here, the next step is to let it stand a few moments and then strain it and then apply it. There are 2 ways to do an herbal compress. You really just, a fabric like a towel will work. I like to use paper towel, especially if I'm doing it for illness, because you can just throw that away. You don't have to worry about sanitizing or worrying about transferring germs. Today though, we're going to use the regular towel. A regular washcloth or a thin towel, a chunk of t-shirt, anything cloth will work. We're going to be wrapping it so that it will go across the eyes, because the sinuses are through this region of the face here. So it covers behind your brow bone and then across your cheekbones. So you can see here as I am dipping this in, why leaving the plant parts. You can see some of the plant parts that I left in there. Oops, sorry. You want to wring it out so it's not dripping. You can see why the plant parts in there. You don't really want those on your face. And then we just apply it across the face. And then, do you want to hold it there? Just hold it there. So we're applying it across the face. We're holding it in place. And the idea is to keep it here until it cools off, which can be several minutes. We're going to pretend for a second here that it's cooled off, and when it has, you just come back to the bowl, dip it in again, and you can repeat as many times as you need to. Again, I try to rinse out as much so I'm not dripping, so we don't drip too much and make it too messy. Wring out as much as you can is what I was trying to say there. So yeah, we're going to leave it here until it cools off. It usually takes several minutes. The thicker your towel, like when I do it with a paper towel, it doesn't soak in as much liquid, and it also tends to not hold heat as long. Cloth tends to hold heat longer, particularly terry cloths. So that's pretty much it. You continue to repeat that until the water is cooled off. Be aware that if you're working with a sensitive individual like small children, or if you're working with someone who's got just very sensitive skin, you may need to work with letting it cool a little bit longer. If when you put it on the face, if it feels uncomfortably hot, take it off and let it cool a little bit before putting it back on. And there you go. There's an herbal compress.
All right, so you saw how easy that was, right? If I'm working with someone who's got a illness, an active illness, flu or cold sort of thing, I am far more likely to go with the paper towel route for doing the herbal compress, in part just so that I don't have to worry so much about perfectly cleansing the towel when I'm done, because I typically just throw them in the laundry. And if I'm working with allergies, or occasionally I've had sinus infections that have gotten to the point where it's a severe sinus headache, I'm far more likely to reach for the towel or the washcloth, in part because those will tend to hold the heat longer. So, it's up to you what works for you, but they're so easy. When I'm done, I take whatever infusion is remaining and I throw that out onto my plants in front and let them take in whatever is left. And then, there you go. Herbal compresses are really, really easy, really effective. And yeah. So now you've got some ways to use your herbs. You've got a decent formula you've put together. You've observed your symptoms. What about if you don't have any illness yet, right? You can always make yourself some preparations in advance. There's a lot of different potential preparations you can do. You know how you typically see flus or colds or upper respiratory tract problems in your family. Blend a tea or two that are just ready to go. You don't have to do a lot, just to make, a small, handful, enough that you could make 3 pots of tea or so with it. And keep those labeled in your cabinet. Make sure you label it clearly so you know what it's for, and so the rest of the family or friends or whomever might be accessing your herbs, especially if you're the one who's sick, so they know what it's for. You can also make balms and oils and that sort of thing in preparation. One of my favorite ones to do in preparation is fire cider. It's, I use it as a preventative. And if flu or cold symptoms are starting to show up, I might bump up my use. I might be using it daily as salad dressing, let's say, or whatever I'm using it as, daily for my prevention. But then if I notice a stuffy nose coming on, I might just, take a couple of tablespoonfuls, not even necessarily measured, just, take a couple swallows of fire cider every day until those symptoms vanish. The heat in fire cider, often the antimicrobials we use in fire cider will often drive out the illness, make your sinus area, your upper respiratory tract, so unfriendly to potential virins and bacteria and stuff that it can prevent it or can drive it out before it really takes hold. So fire cider is one. I like the herbal honeys. I like to make a variety of herbal honeys, and including, the electuaries and the more infused honeys. I like having those around for both prevention, but also when illness strikes, it makes it very easy to just get something in you, some herbs in you really quickly and easily. So those are a few ideas of things you can do to prepare. And yeah, I hope you stay well and you don't need this information, but I